The untold story of Hitler's Third Reich. 12 years. That's how long it took for a failed artist from Austria to rise from obscurity, conquer most of Europe, and then watch his empire crumble into ash and ruin. 12 years that changed the course of human history forever. In 1933, Adolf Hitler declared the birth of the Third Reich, a regime he claimed would last 1,000 years. By 1945, Germany lay in ruins, its cities bombed to rubble, its people devastated, and its leader dead by his own hand in a bunker beneath Berlin. But the story of the Third Reich isn't just about Hitler. It's about how an entire nation was seduced by promises of greatness, how ordinary people became complicit in extraordinary evil, and how the darkest impulses of humanity were unleashed on an industrial scale. Welcome to Chapters in History. Today, we're exploring the untold story of Hitler's Third Reich. Not just the familiar tale of war and genocide, but the human drama of how a civilized nation descended into barbarism, and how the world finally found the courage to stop it. This is a story that must be told, remembered, and never forgotten.
Chapter 1. The Rise.
January 30th, 1933. Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Hindenburg. The old aristocrat believes you can control the former corporal, use him as a puppet, while the established politicians pull the strings.
He couldn't have been more wrong.
Hitler didn't seize power, he was handed it. Germany in 1933 was a nation in crisis. The economy was shattered, unemployment was rampant, and the humiliation of defeat in World War I still burned in the German soul. People were desperate for someone to blame, someone to follow, someone to promise them greatness again. Within months, Hitler had consolidated power with terrifying efficiency. The Reichstag fire gave him the excuse to suspend civil liberties. The Enabling Act gave him the power to pass laws without parliament. By summer 1934, he had eliminated his rivals within the Nazi Party during the Night of the Long Knives. But the real story isn't just about political maneuvering. Hitler didn't just change Germany's government, he changed German society itself. The Nazis understood something that previous dictators had missed. Control people's minds, and you control everything. Mass rallies at Nuremberg with hundreds of thousands of participants. Torchlight parades through the streets of Berlin. Children indoctrinated from birth in Nazi ideology. The swastika replacing the cross in churches. Art, music, literature, even science. Everything was bent to serve the Nazi vision. And at the center of it all, a growing obsession with racial purity that would soon metastasize into something unimaginable. Chapter 2. The Conquest. September 1st, 1939. German panzers roll across the Polish border, and the world holds its breath. Hitler had gambled that Britain and France would back down again, as they had over the Rhineland, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. They didn't. World War II had begun. What followed was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Poland fell in weeks, Norway and Denmark in months. Then came the impossible. France, the great military power of Europe, collapsed in just 6 weeks. By summer 1940, Hitler stood master of Europe, from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees. Britain stood alone, its cities burning under German bombs, its people preparing for invasion. The Third Reich seemed unstoppable, but Hitler made a fatal mistake. He believed his own propaganda. The easy victories had convinced him that Germany was invincible, that his enemies were weak, that destiny was on his side. June 22nd, 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler threw 3.8 million men, 3,350 tanks, and 2,770 aircraft into the largest military operation in human history. The goal wasn't just conquest, it was annihilation. The German army advanced hundreds of miles in weeks, capturing millions of Soviet soldiers. Moscow seemed within reach. But as winter approached, the Wehrmacht discovered something that would doom the Third Reich. The Soviet Union was far stronger than Hitler had imagined. And behind the advancing armies came something even more sinister. The Einsatzgruppen, death squads tasked with the systematic murder of Jews, communists, and intellectuals. The Holocaust had begun.
Chapter 3. The Horror.
January 20th, 1942. A villa in Wannsee, outside Berlin. 15 Nazi officials meet to discuss what they euphemistically call the final solution to the Jewish question. What they were actually planning was the systematic murder of every Jew in Europe. 11 million people, marked for death with bureaucratic efficiency. The Holocaust wasn't just murder, it was industrialized killing. Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Bergen-Belsen, names that would become synonymous with humanity's capacity for evil. Gas chambers designed to kill thousands per day. Crematoria to dispose of the bodies. Railways to transport the victims. 6 million Jews murdered. But they weren't the only victims. Roma, disabled individuals, political prisoners, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, anyone who didn't fit the Nazi vision of racial purity was targeted for elimination. The most chilling aspect wasn't just the scale, it was the normalcy. Ordinary people became mass murderers, bureaucrats processed death certificates, engineers designed more efficient killing methods, doctors performed medical experiments on living victims. But even as the Third Reich committed these unspeakable crimes, cracks were appearing in Hitler's empire. The German army was bleeding to death in the frozen hell of the Eastern Front. Allied bombers were reducing German cities to rubble, and resistance movements across occupied Europe were fighting back. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the French resistance, Norwegian commandos, Soviet partisans, ordinary people finding extraordinary courage to resist evil, even when resistance meant certain death.
Chapter 4. The Fall.
June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, opening the second front Hitler had dreaded. The Third Reich was now fighting a war on 3 fronts: east, west, and from the air. The collapse was swift and brutal. Soviet forces drove German armies back across Eastern Europe. American and British forces broke out of Normandy and raced toward Germany. The Luftwaffe was shot from the skies. The German economy, dependent on slave labor, began to crumble. But Hitler refused to surrender. As Allied armies closed in on Berlin, he retreated to his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. The man who had promised to make Germany great again now ordered its complete destruction. In his final weeks, Hitler blamed everyone but himself. The German people had failed him. His generals had betrayed him. The Jews had somehow caused Germany's defeat, even as they were being murdered in death camps. April 30th, 1945. Soviet forces were fighting in the streets of Berlin, just blocks from Hitler's bunker. Rather than face capture, Hitler shot himself. Eva Braun, his mistress of 12 years whom he had married the day before, took poison. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich was dead, having lasted not 1,000 years, but 12 years and 4 months. Final chapter, the reckoning. The costs were staggering. Between 50 and 80 million people died in World War II. 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Entire cities were reduced to rubble. Ancient cultures were nearly extinct. The world had been forever changed. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Third Reich isn't about Hitler. It's about us. How ordinary people can be persuaded to commit extraordinary evil. How civilized societies can descend into barbarism. How quickly democracy can die when people stop defending it. The Germans who supported Hitler weren't monsters. They were people like us, facing economic hardship, political uncertainty, and social upheaval. They were seduced by promises of greatness, blinded by propaganda, and convinced that their problems were caused by others. The Third Reich succeeded because good people did nothing. It failed because eventually, good people did everything they could to stop it. Today, survivors of the Holocaust repeat a simple phrase: never forget. Not because they want to dwell on the past, but because they understand that the capacity for evil isn't unique to any one people or time period. The untold story of Hitler's Third Reich isn't just about what happened. It's about what could happen again if we're not vigilant. Democracy is fragile. Civilization is fragile. human decency is fragile. The Third Reich promised to last 1,000 years. It lasted 12. But its lessons must last forever. This has been Chapters in History. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of our capacity for both evil and good, and why we must always choose to remember, to learn, and to do better.